Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew, and today we're going to be talking about privacy-preserving AI. Specifically, we're going to be asking the question, is it possible to answer questions using data that we cannot see? Using data that we don't have access to. Let's start with an example. So let's say we wanted to answer the question, what do tumors look like in humans? Well, the answer to this question is pretty complex, so perhaps we'll train a classifier to be able to identify tumors in images. Step one for this would be to acquire a training data set. But the kind of data we need to answer this kind of question is very personal. It can be legally complicated to buy and sell it. So it's likely we'll have to go to sort of a small number of sources and purchase it, and it's likely to be very expensive. If it's very expensive, we'll need to find someone to finance our project. So we'll persuade a VC to help back us. And if we're going to find someone to finance our project, then that means we need to create a business plan that shows how we're going to pay them back someday. If we're going to create a business plan, then we have to create a business. We have to find a business partner. And if we find a business partner, then we have to go spam all of our friends on LinkedIn trying to find someone in business who will help us with this project. And all this is because we want to answer the question, what do tumors look like in humans? But if we wanted to answer a different question, what do handwritten digits look like? Well, this would be super simple. We would download a data set, download a state-of-the-art training script, and run it. And right then and there, within only a few minutes, we would have a state-of-the-art classifier with potentially superhuman ability to identify these kinds of patterns. So why is there a difference between these two? Well, the big reason is that getting access to private data is really, really hard. There's a lot of friction involved in the process, so much that you basically have to dedicate a portion of your life just to getting access to one particular data set in order to be able to work with it. And as a result, we spend most of our time working on tasks like this, right? Tasks where the data is publicly available and easy to access. And we don't spend nearly as much time working on tasks like this. So raise your hand if you've ever trained a classifier on the MNIST data set. I expect pretty much everybody, right? So now raise your hand if you've ever trained a classifier to predict dementia. Diabetes? Got one? What's your name? Sandy. Sandy? Can I get a round of applause for Sandy for working on diabetes? But as you can see, it's incredibly uncommon. That's just because it's really, really hard to do. And yet, if we can state it plainly, these tasks represent, our friends and family and like the things that people are actually suffering, real human problems. But the issue is that if we want to address real human issues, we have to have data about real humans going through those things. And getting access, that is exactly the kind of data that is really, really hard to get access to. And so as a result, it's hard to work on these problems. And that brings me back to the question I asked at the beginning. Is it possible to answer questions using data that we cannot see? Because if the answer to this question is yes, then it means it might be possible for us to build infrastructure to make access to private data simpler. Perhaps even so simple that we can simply pip install access to the world's scientific data the same way that we install access to our deep learning frameworks. If the answer to this question is yes, it might actually be possible in the near future for you to wake up on a Saturday morning in your pajamas and roll on down to your kitchen table, flip open your laptop, and train a classifier on data that's living in, say, 100 different hospitals. And take a classifier from 96% accuracy to 96.1% accuracy and save 100 lives before you even have breakfast. Or take a classifier and take it from 96% accuracy to 96.1% accuracy and help 1,000 people be a little less lonely. Work on problems about people. So in the next few minutes, we're going to talk about a tool built by a community called OpenMined. So OpenMined is a community of over 5,000 volunteers who care about this problem enough to spend their nights and weekends trying to make privacy-preserving AI as easy as possible. Specifically, we're going to talk about a tool called PySyft. PySyft extends PyTorch with tools for privacy-preserving machine learning. And it's my hope that by explaining how some of these tools are working and explaining a few of the features that are either already developed or on our near-term roadmap, that you'll be able to see just how easy it might become to work with privacy-preserving data if we have infrastructure that knows how to protect it. So let's begin. So the first one we're going to talk about is remote execution. So remote execution, simply stated, is the ability to leverage PyTorch on machines that you don't have direct access to. Let's see what this looks like. So the first thing we do is we import Syft and we import Torch. And then we use this thing called a Torch hook, which augments Torch with tools for privacy-preserving machine learning. Then we initialize a reference to a remote machine. In this case, it's one that's sort of relating to, say, a hospital data center. Okay? And this allows us to actually interact with PyTorch operations and PyTorch tensors that live on this machine. So in this case, we can send a tensor to this hospital data center, and what gets returned to us is a pointer. This pointer has all of the functionality that PyTorch would normally have, but when you interact with it, when you actually use the PyTorch API, instead of executing it locally, it forwards commands to the remote machine and returns back a pointer to the result. The implication of these pointer tensors is that now we can use normal PyTorch API, things we already know how to do, to orchestrate complex operations across multiple different remote machines. Now, finally, we have this very special command at the bottom here, .get, which requests information from the remote machine to be sent back to me. More on that in a bit. So now we know how to do processing using PyTorch on a remote machine. Thus, we can work with data that we never actually call into our own machines. Okay, that's pretty cool. But that opens up another question. How do we actually do good data science when we aren't allowed to see the data, right? Well, there are a few interesting features we can do for this too. So a couple of them are search and example data. So let's say we have what's called a grid client. So a grid client it's just a collection of workers. So previously, we had a worker pointing to, say, a hospital, right, or hospital data center. This might be a whole collection of hospitals, right? And this gives us features such as search. So let's say I wanted to do some sort of analysis relating to diabetes, right? So perhaps just like you. I can search for a given data set. I get returned back pointers to this remote data. And I get back metadata relating to these pointers that explains sort of the schema, how it was collected, things about the distribution of the data that are going to help inform me in my data science project, such that I can then put together a data set that's relevant for my problem that could actually be distributed in multiple different locations. And then when I want to do, say, feature engineering and putting my model together, in some cases you can even make available sample data or data that was sort of synthetically generated to be similar to the distribution that we'll be working on. Right? These are the kind of features that can make it possible for us to do all the same data science techniques that we normally do on data that we don't actually get to see. So that's all great. We can do sort of remote feature engineering, but this still has this mysterious .get function. How do we ensure that when we ask for a tensor back from a remote machine, that we aren't accidentally also getting back private information? This brings us to the third tool, differential privacy. Differential privacy, has anyone come across this before? OK, cool. All right, quite a few people. That's great. So I'm going to do a quick overview. The differential privacy, simply stated, is a field, a group of sort of mathematical algorithms that try to ensure that statistical analysis does not compromise privacy. Okay? So let's say we have this database. So it's got a bunch of people in it, and it's got a single column. And we're going to query this database. And we're going to look at the output of this query, and we're going to ask a very important question. What is the maximum amount that the output of my query, the output of my function, could change if I removed John from the database? Okay? If that is 0, then I know that the output of this function is not conditioned on John's information. Right? He's not contributing to this query. If I could prove that for everyone in the database, right, by removing them or swapping them with someone else, and this output wouldn't change, well, then I know that the output of my function doesn't depend on any specific individual. Now, it turns out there aren't that many sort of functions that satisfy this very nice property. But this intuitive definition, this intuitive notion of what perfect privacy would be, like how we can query a database and perhaps get back some kind of result without divulging any private information, is very powerful. And it also lends clarity to what we do when we have a function that is not perfectly private. We add a certain amount of noise to sort of smooth over any potential private information. How much noise, you might ask? Let's consider an example. So I have a twin sister. She works in political science. And often they want to do surveys over very sort of taboo behavior. Right? So they want to understand, say, how many people are committing a certain kind of crime, right? Or maybe how many PyTorch users forget to zero out their gradients before forward propagating. Anyway, so something that someone would be inclined to deceive about if you asked, right? So let's say I wanted to survey everyone here. I wanted to say, OK, how many people in here jaywalked, right? So jaywalking is a really big deal in California, apparently. And I was worried that you were going to lie to me, right? So what I would do is I would distribute coins to all of you. And I'd say, OK, flip this coin twice somewhere that I can't see it. And I want you to answer truthfully if your first coin flip is a heads, And if your first coin flip is a tails, I want you to answer true or false, yes or no, according to the second coin flip. So this means that roughly half of you would give me an honest answer, and the other half of you would give me a perfect 50-50 distribution. And I don't know which person is in which group. But the powerful thing is that in expectation, the result that I get is the true distribution, the true number. So let's say 55% of the survey respondents said yes, right? Then I know that the center of the distribution is actually 60%, which got averaged with a 50-50 coin flip. Does that make sense? So I can back out and get at the aggregate statistic that I'm interested in without me actually knowing any of your private information. And the degree to which these coins are likely to be heads or tails corresponds to the degree of plausible deniability, the degree of privacy that you have in this setting. So that's all good theory, and I'll give some more resources for how you can learn more about this at the end. But what is this actually going to look like in PyTorch? So let's say we have a pointer to a remote data set, right? Private information, and I call it .get. Whoa, big error pops up. I'm sorry, you tried to request access to private information. You can't do that. So we have an additional function to .get, which accepts a parameter called epsilon. Epsilon is a means by which we can choose how much of our privacy budget we want to spend. See, the vision that we see happening here is that any given data science project will have a certain privacy budget, which is dependent on the level of trust and the kind of relationship that you have with the data owner. Right? It might be 0, so you can only do algorithms that will as a guaranteed leak exactly no information, or you might have a higher degree of trust with the individual, and so they can do sort of more complex queries. And this mechanism makes it so that you can track private data all the way through to, say, an in-trained model or some output of your function, and it will automatically add the appropriate amount of noise to make sure that you stay under your privacy budget. Cool? All right, now, so we've conquered a lot of challenges so far. Now we have a formal privacy budgeting mechanism, but we have a couple of outstanding challenges. So whenever I'm doing remote computation, when I'm doing remote analysis, let's say training a model on remote data, I'm sending my model in and doing training, but that means that my model is exposed. If it's a really valuable model, someone could take it. That's not cool. And this brings me to the last tool I want to talk about, which is secure multi-party computation. Secure MPC? Anyone? All right, cool. That's I can see you. Yeah. So secure MPC is the most magical algorithm I have come across since learning about machine learning. I am super excited to tell you about it. It's really cool. So this is the sort of close to the textbook definition, but for the context of machine learning, the implication of this definition is that multiple people can share ownership of a number. Share ownership of a number. Let's see how it works. So let's say I have the number 5, and I split it into 2 shares, a 2 and a 3. Okay, 2 plus 3 equals 5. I'm hand-waving over a little bit just to go quickly, but for the sake of this example, 2 plus 3 equals 5, that's how we're going to encrypt this. And the interesting thing, let's say I have 2 friends, Marianne and Bobby, and I give them these 2 shares. These are now the shareholders of this number. I disappear, and now this 5 is encrypted between the 2 of them. Why is it encrypted? Because neither of them can know what value is actually encrypted between them by looking at their own share. You have to look at both shares to know what the number is. And secondarily, you get shared governance, because the number can only be decrypted if all the shareholders agree to pool their shares. So it's more than just encryption. It's shared control over a digital asset. And the really amazing part is that while it is encrypted, we can perform computation. Let's say we wanted to multiply the number times 2. Simple arithmetic. If each person multiplies their shares times 2, now we have an encrypted 10. And it turns out there's a whole host of protocols in the cryptography community that allow you to do lots of different functions while numbers are in this state, including the functions that we need for deep learning. And this brings me to the real link. Models and data sets are just large collections of numbers, which we can individually encrypt, such that models and data sets can have shared ownership and shared governance. So what does this look like in PyTorch? I have several clients, and instead of calling .send, now I have a method called .share, and I pass in a list of shareholders. And what gets returned to me is a pointer, again, with the normal PyTorch API, which I can then use, and it will automatically implement the cryptography under the hood. And of course, we can do what we can do with tensors, we can also do with models, so encrypted training, encrypted prediction. And this brings us to lots of desirable properties useful for privacy-preserving machine learning. And so this brings it back to the question that we started at the beginning. Is it possible to answer questions using data that we cannot see? I believe that it's possible. And here's a few examples of tools that I think will get us there. It's not the full list, but I hope that this sort of opens your eyes to the potential that in the very near future, we could be able to pip install access to the data to solve the most important problems that we face. If you'd like to learn more about this, oh yeah. And if we do this, we can spend less time working on those problems and more time working on these, which would be great. If you'd like to learn more, check out this awesome course from Udacity, which was sponsored by Facebook. Thank you very much for your attention. Have a good night.